Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 72.
They took that article and they wrote a piece about how Zuckerberg and Elon are in for a world of hurt. So I'm happy to say that seemingly the media space is ripe for noticing that we're doing something different and useful.
You might remember Yevgeny Simkin. He's a friend of the show who made headlines a few years back with his essay, Social Media is the Problem. Now he's back with Says Us, that's SEZ.us, a platform designed to break us free from the next Facebook-sized behemoth. Instead of building another giant controlled from the top, he's betting on a decentralized model, where communities keep ownership of their own identities and conversations.
I think that the ship on building yet another behemoth where we've convinced enough average Joes to come and sign on, that ship has sailed. And we don't want that, because then that you've just built yet another behemoth, which then needs to be controlled from some central location. And you've got, 25 people who are once again in charge of everything. And that's just not good. I'm a big advocate for not having a Politburo at the helm of anything. So the solution is to convince enough enterprises, right, new startups or existing enterprises, to switch over to a model where they can just bring all of whatever their community already is. It just comes along for the ride. Essentially, they're just plugged into the larger network. And the analogy I use is that if you're used to going to some discrete coffee shop that's in the middle of nowhere, and then that coffee shop moves into a mall, and if you're a big enough fan of that coffee shop, or it's a bookstore or whatever it is, you then walk into the mall to follow them because you want to continue to do business with that particular enterprise. But now you're in the mall, and now you've been exposed to everything else that's in the mall.
I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and this is Outrage Overload. Let's get right into my conversation with Yevgeny Simkin. Yevgeny Simkin, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
David, thank you so much for inviting me back.
So the last time we spoke, at least partially, it was about an article you had written about how social media is the problem, and you were encouraging us to get off social media. And in that talk, you also had some ideas about how we could build better social media. And I think you're trying to prove that out with what you're doing now, right? So, I know we're going to try to branch off into some more, side stuff that you haven't maybe talked about all the time, but you got to tell us a little bit, at least the basics of what your new project is, what Says Us, and what's unique about it.
Sure. Well, there's a lot to say there, but yes, in the broadest of strokes, I did spend some years shouting into the wilderness about how social media is corrupting our well, it's not social, and it's it's a very destructive force. Although that isn't all it is. It's also it has many beneficial qualities. But on net, I think that it's difficult to say that it's worth the price that society is paying for the way that it's been unrolled. And the other thing we talked about in the last conversation was that I had and do still have an organization called Samas.online, which is an anti-censorship platform. So in the course of running that, Michael Sprague and I, he's my co-founder in that enterprise and in Says Us. He and Joe Trippi have been friends and colleagues for decades. And Joe Trippi, who, if your audience doesn't know, is a very prominent capital D Democratic campaign operator. And he was Howard Dean's campaign manager, and he has many other credits to his name. So he's heavily tied into the world of democracy in general, but specifically capital D Democratic politics. So he approached Michael and myself about a little over a year ago and said, isn't it time that we, the way he phrased it, isn't it time we stop renting and start owning in terms of the social media space? Because this was just around the time that Elon had really driven Twitter into a ditch. Although my argument is that Twitter has been in a ditch. So this is when Elon set the ditch-riven Twitter on fire. So yeah, and we said, yeah, sure, if you can find some resources for us to build this, using most of the things that I'd been writing about and many other ideas that have been in the mix. And so we did. So he found a bunch of small. There are no major named investors in this right now, but I can list off some names, which again your audience will probably have heard of, but people like Dick Gephardt and Stephanie Shriok, Paige Gardner, um, General Wesley Clark, Adam Kinzinger. Like, I mean, we haven't raised a ton of money, but the money that they've raised made us, gave us the fuel we needed to put this thing together and launch it. So now there are apps in both Android and iOS stores and a website for the social media thing called Zezas. So to answer your question about what makes this thing different, like there are many things that make it different. And again, it as a technology, it requires some fairly deep diving to understand because it's nuanced. We didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. All of the main things that social media does well, we want to preserve. But my argument had been all along that the thing that social media does very badly is that it essentially brings out the worst in people because it gives them the space to anonymously say whatever negative thing first appears in their mind when they confront some idea that they find unsettling. And then the more vitriol and the more hyperbole and the more disdain that is expressed, the more they push those messages to everybody's attention because it is in fact the cortisol hit that everyone's addicted to and everybody likes, as outrage as you know. So we thought, okay, well, let's flip the switch on that and let's rearm the public with the things that they have evolved over millions of years of social evolution, where you have a reputation. You don't think about your reputation in a minute by minute basis, but it in fact is the underlying mechanism that keeps you behaving socially, if we're going to use that word. So every time you encounter anyone out in the street or anywhere else, your ape instincts kick in and you say, what am I going to do here in order to give the person with whom I'm engaging the best impression possible so that I can cooperate with them in the most effective way possible. You don't think about that. Nobody thinks about that, but that's how we've evolved to live. And so the idea is if we re-engage those mechanisms digitally, then people will be more polite, more reticent to be mean, more likely to try to get other people to like them and be amenable to their thoughts. And then we can open up the spigot and let people have as much disagreement as they want. Like I'm a very, very fervent believer in free speech, more fervent than most of the people who claim to be its advocates. But free speech does not mean free reach, as we say. And your ability to speak freely needs to be confronted with the social consequences that come with saying things that the community that you're speaking to doesn't find welcoming. So we can talk more about that, of course, but that's the biggest, most visible change. And then underneath the hood, we're working with the DSNP, which is a Frank McCourt enterprise under Project Liberty, to essentially give everybody back their identity and the freedom to own their identity, and then later the freedom to own all their content, and then later the freedom to be able to exchange monetary things of monetary worth without a lot of rent-seeking intermediaries. But that's much, much further down the line. So that's the core issue and the core story.
Well, yeah. So one thing you notice as a user of Says Us compared to other services right away is that, and this ties into the reputation thing, I'm sure, is that when you click, the like button or the thumbs up button, it doesn't just move on. Like a dialog box comes up and you're asked, to move these sliders around these various vectors. So tell us about that. I mean, first of all, like, I'm intimidated by that when I click on it. Well, now I have to think. You're making me think. And I'm sure that's kind of the intent. But so tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the issue of translating what normally happens in your mind when you encounter other people to something that's digital is a challenging one. And we spent a lot of time thinking about it. Because when you encounter, let's just, and as an example, you're at a party and you walk up to somebody you don't know and you start a conversation with them. and they start saying things. Now, you're not just liking or just not liking what they're saying. There's immediately a panoply of different um, mechanisms that or vectors along which you are grading what they're saying. So they might be saying something that is well intentioned and polite and kind, and yet completely misguided, and from your perspective, based in all sorts of misinformation, right? Like so the perfect example of this is I constantly hear from people who are fundamentally confused about the what's going on in Gaza, and from the best intentions, they will utter things that I know for a fact to be wrong. And I know that they're not saying them because they are malevolent or because they're looking to cause any harm. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, this is a kind person. This is a polite person. This is a person with good intentions. But they're also misled, misguided, and continuing to mislead because they are now propagating false claims. So when you click on that thumbs up, yes, the dialogue comes up. And what people will see now is these 5 vectors, including politeness, informativeness, insightfulness. And so you can, and you don't have to, this is the thing, you don't have to be intimidated. You don't have to rate anybody's utterances. But if you're compelled to rate somebody's utterances, you can rate them along these different vectors. So you could say this thing is misleading, but kind, right? Like that, because those two things are not mutually exclusive. Or you can say this is informative, but rude. And then the person who's receiving that rating, they will over time aggregate this reputation. And so 2 things are happening. One, they will notice that they're developing a reputation as a rude person. This may incentivize them to then have modulate their utterances to be more kind, more polite, maybe. But more importantly, their reputation is something that other people can use as something they can determine whether or not they want to engage with this person. So the other sliders, which you may not have seen yet, is when you post something, you can decide who can reply to you, and that isn't based on their like on Twitter, it's like whether or not they follow you or whatever those rules are. With us, it's just you just decide, well, I don't want to hear from anybody who hasn't earned a reasonably good politeness rating, right? I don't care how their other ratings are, but I want only people who are polite. And so again, that protects you from having to deal with people who haven't earned politeness ratings. It incentivizes people who haven't earned those politeness ratings to earn them if they want to talk to you. And it relegates all the people who are just trolls or whatever negative characteristics we're going to ascribe. It relegates them to their own, kind of they're sidelined. And again, they're free to continue to post, but they're going to be able to reach fewer and fewer people, not because we are stifling them, but because they themselves are being relegated to some hole where nobody wants to hear from.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you've heard, some people complain about those kind of models, right? Are they comparing it to like, cancel culture, or are you concerned about some of those things, that there be kind of a hive mind or a mob mentality that could kind of steer the whole ship to a certain place?
Concerned, yes. Obviously, we want to make sure that we don't facilitate more of that than necessary. The idea, hopefully, is that because it is a reputation, as I say, economy, people will think twice about how to use these ratings. Because when you rate somebody, it actually costs you some of your own reputation points. And the only way you can avoid paying with your reputation is if you actually reply to the comment. So when you're rating somebody negatively, you can do it essentially for free. I mean, obviously it's not dollars, but you're not paying with your reputation if you reply. But then when you reply, that opens you up for retributive ratings where you will suffer some other penalty with other community members rating your reply negatively. So there's a dynamic there where I think, and well, look, we're brand new, so we'll see how this works. So far in the few months that we've been operating, we haven't seen anything like that. There have been a few notable moments where people came in and started being bombastic, and their ratings took a dive, and their posts stopped appearing in the public feed. Now, wherever they are privately, they can continue to post, right? So really, the main effect this has is sort of on the town square, where the public feed is showing the posts of the posts that have been rated the highest and the people who have been rated the highest. Again, we're measuring for positivity. We're measuring for who's the most informative, who's the most insightful, who's the most polite. So that's the posts that wind up visible to all. And it's not, there's no algorithm that says, well, you prefer this and that person prefers that. No, we just say everybody should see whatever's the most positive. And if it becomes overwhelming, we'll just start culling it so that you're not getting a million posts. If everybody's being positive, that would be wonderful, and you'll see some percentage of those. But when you are not being pulled into the square because your posts aren't positive, then you're just posting to whoever it is that's following you. So the people that are following you, they can continue to see what you're saying, and they can not follow you if they don't want to. So there is no, so if the hive mind comes in and gives you a ferociously bad rating, okay, I mean, you can keep posting, you'll have a bad rating. I can imagine that there will be situations where people who are they have very prominent political personas, and so for whatever reason they are deemed persona non grata by some major contingent of the community, and maybe their ratings will suffer in that situation. We don't allow collaborative ratings, like if we detect that there's like a campaign to hurt somebody's ratings, people will be ejected from the platform for that behavior. That is something that we forbid. But in terms of organically, if people are rating somebody however they rate them, we'll see what that looks like. My suspicion is that in the grand scheme of things, people who have enough of a popular following will continue to retain a positive rating. That is my intuition. But if that turns out not to be true, we'll see what we have to do about that. I mean, because we want it to reflect the real world as much as possible.
Yeah, and so how are you? How does us kind of avoid some of the sort of dopamine challenges that the like button created for us all?
Well, the thing is, I don't want to avoid the dopamine challenges. I want to engage the dopamine that is brought about by benevolence and positivity, because those do spur dopamine. We all love happy endings. We all love when somebody has a what's the word, when you a redemption arc, right? So all of those things are good, and we want people to post things that are insightful and informative and frequently positive, and those are the things that we're hoping will surface, and people will come along and say, yeah, this is good. I enjoyed seeing this. And of course, a lot of the things that people are posting now, I mean, we're in a very specific time. I don't know if you heard, but a certain individual got elected last November whom many people in the country and in the world are not particularly fans of. And subsequently, there is a lot of emotion around it. But when you read through the posts on the site, you will find that the posts are actually pretty sober. I mean, sometimes they're distressed, but they're not vulgar. There's very little hyperbole. It's mostly people kind of soberly assessing what is going on. Unfortunately, some of the things that are happening in today's news are in fact so hyperbolic that it's difficult to relate to them soberly, because there is in fact some pretty drastic stuff going on. But yeah, so I don't think that we're pushing to avoid dopamine. I think we're pushing to elicit it from something other than negativity and fear and rage and anger.
Yeah. So I guess on that point, what are you looking for in terms of like an inflection point from a cool new thing to playing a significant role? Is there something you're watching for there?
Yeah. So that is more about the integration with the DSNP. So the DSNP, which stands for the Decentralized Social Networking Protocol, is it's a technology, but the underlying intention is to free all of the various communities and individuals from being held hostage by the platforms where they're held hostage today. This is what Cory Doctorow coined the term enshittification for. And the notion is that this protocol, whichever new organization or old, I mean, obviously existing organizations can sign up to it too. Whoever wants to participate can plug their platform into this protocol. And then once you sign up to anything that's plugged in, you're essentially everywhere. Like you're a presence everywhere. And to the extent to which you want, your community can be preserved everywhere. So when you move from platform A to platform B to platform C, um, everything you do is kind of known, and this is good because then if platform A stops serving whatever needs you're looking for, you don't have to create a new account and start reacquainting yourself with all the same people that you're acquainted to there on something new. It's all there out of the box. It exists. So the thing that we would love to see is for more and more platforms to sign on to this. Now this is something that's very similar to what is happening over with Mastodon and with Blue Sky. So there's two other protocols that are being utilized. We have no dog in this race. We're happy to work with all of them. But the notion is to break free of the Facebook and Twitter and whatever other closed ecosystem, and allow people to be themselves, right? So you're not a specific user on Twitter and a specific other user in Facebook and a specific other user in YouTube. You're just yourself, and wherever you go, and it doesn't mean that people have to know who you are. You could be a pseudonym, but it's the same pseudonym, and it goes everywhere, and it's connected to the same people, and that way there's that freedom that comes from no longer being a product that's being commercialized by a platform to be sold to advertisers. Instead, you are a person. And personhood, by the way, sorry, I have to mention this, super important. One of the things we do is we require people to have a cell phone, because having a cell phone number that can receive an SMS it creates a huge burden for people who are trying to push a bunch of bots onto the system. And if anybody is discovered to be a bot, they're instantly kicked off, because one of the biggest challenges in other social media is that you never know who you're talking to and if in fact they are human. So again, bringing humanity back out in the street, you don't run into a lot of bots, and we're trying to do something similar here.
Yeah. Although, the more I learn about human psychology, the harder it is for me to check the "Am I a robot?" button.
Yes, I know. It's true. That's true. Yes. I always feel very self-conscious about checking that button. There's some joke in there somewhere. It's not mine, but something about
right.
constantly proving to robots that you're not one of them over and over again.
Right. So have you thought about this? And I don't know if you have thought about it, how might you review it or keep it in mind as you observe the system growing and kind of evolving and finding its place? Is there a chance here that it kind of just becomes so sanitized that it's just sort of boring and it's not compelling for people to come back on?
Well, I mean, I would hate to discover that is the principal reason why people talk to each other in general, is because they're looking to be outraged and incensed. I don't get that sense anywhere else where there are currently polite conversations happening. Be it so LinkedIn is a perfect example of where reputation, because it's your professional reputation, plays a huge role in civilizing how people speak. You find very, very little of the kind of flaming that you see on Twitter. You don't see that on LinkedIn because people understand that their professional lives are on the line. And so, so there's a very real dog in the race for them. However, the conversations on LinkedIn, I think, are extremely interesting. And I follow lots of them with a lot of, I don't see them suffering for lack of participation. There's tons and tons of people weighing in on controversial issues, and usually the conversations stay fairly polite. So we're hoping to incentivize people to behave similarly, but I doubt that it will become boring, because most of the things that people are discussing it's the same topics. It's just that they're discussing them more seriously, more earnestly, more good faith. Anyway, I guess we'll see, but that isn't something that honestly, that's never crossed my mind, that it might become so polite that people just walk away because they're looking for a hit of being incensed, and that's just not there anymore.
I think I'm just overly sensitive to it since I talk about it so much.
I can imagine. Yes.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about, or one of the complaints a lot of us have about the big tech, high tech, the big tech social media platforms, is some of their ethics, right? Particularly, and one example of that is kind of their data abuse, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Like they have a lot of data on people, but they don't have to follow the same rules that one would have to follow to like publish peer-reviewed research about their users or whatever, right? They can just run these secret experiments behind the scenes and we don't know anything about them. Have you thought about that and maybe worked with some social scientists or others to have maybe opt-in mechanisms where people could be parts of peer-reviewed research that could go out so we could all benefit from the behaviors we see on these platforms?
We haven't thought about that specific use case. The use case, I mean, we've thought of a very closely related use case, which for us seems much more pressing at this time, and that is the fact that at the moment, all of the various AI enterprises are using all of this material for training their language models, again, without anybody's consent and mostly without anybody even realizing that it's happening. So the thought we had was once we get to the second part of this DSNP enterprise, again, this doesn't exist yet, but we're working on it. And that is to give people full autonomy over their content. And that content could be absolutely anything. So when you have a digital signature on the blockchain between you and everything you've uploaded, we can both restrict it technologically so that it makes it harder for AI bots to just come and strip mine that material. But we could also give people the ability to put a disclaimer there that this material is private and it's not for public consumption in that way. This obviously gives it, so to your question, the same exact kind of permission can be granted or not for data analysis. We will never, like, it's just not part of our particular business model to be looking at people's data in that way or selling the data in that way. That's something we are completely allergic to. But the intention there is with the DSNP to give other platforms the ability to do that, because everybody operates differently. And another project can come along, plug it into the DSNP, have access to all of this data, and then again, provided that the people whose data it is are consent to it being used in that way, and maybe even are able to generate revenue from it to some extent, because again, it's all tied together with who's benefiting from this financially. Then there's every possibility that somebody will come along and do exactly that. But the idea is to shift the mindset, both of the public and of the industry. The public is much harder, and there's too many individuals, and they've got lives to lead and mouths to feed. They're not thinking about this very much. But the industry absolutely needs to be given incentives, right? Sure, a lot of people are talking about legislation. I'm concerned that legislation is not going to do the trick, because the horse is always out of the gate by the time they've figured out how to close that barn door. And it's just, at least the American Congress is not well positioned or well suited to come up with meaningful legislative maneuvers that could really have some positive impact on this. But there can be financial incentives, and then just if you build enough of a system that people migrate to, like currently the DSNP has something like 40 million users, which is obviously a drop in the bucket. But if enough interesting projects come along and plug into the DSNP, there could be a groundswell of people shifting over to using platforms that are explicitly rejecting of these kinds of abuses that the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world have been guilty of. And then that would force those institutions to shift, because they will have mass migration away from their operations, which is what I would hope to see. But so if you're asking for what would be the proof points, that would be a great proof point if Facebook lost 2/3 of its user base to products that are much smaller, much more niche, much more bespoke, and all integrated into a distributed network, which aims to solve their problems in a much more discrete way.
Yeah, I mean, we're so people think we're like deep into the social media, timeline, but we're just in the very, very beginnings of it. We have no idea where this might go.
Absolutely. And I think that's another interesting point where people look at behemoths like Facebook and somehow they've memory hold MySpace, right? Like
Yeah.
it seemed like a completely unshakable mountain, and yet it crumbled to nothingness over the course of a few months. And there are many other examples like that. I think, sure, Facebook has made a very meaningful impact, and but I think that when all is said and done, if something rose that again was kind of distributed across a multitude of features and functions and industries, and it said, look, if you come over here, then you can do all these things, right? And all these things are available. It's not just posting pictures of your cat. It's not just arguing with your crazy uncle about the shape of the earth. There's more here. So this is why I'm like, says us as a platform, it has very, very specific intentions for what it would like to serve, what purposes it would like to serve. But under the hood, there is the notion that we would like to be the tip of a spear of, a giant panoply of services, many of which we would have absolutely no interest in participating in, but that the underlying way that people will engage with those services will be universal. So here's a perfect example. There's a project called Citizen Portal, which is doing something that your listeners will absolutely want to be involved in, where they're taking all of the town hall meetings that are happening across America, and your audience will be shocked to learn that there are thousands and thousands of these happening all the time, and their full roster of meetings that they have in their databases is I think it's like 2 million meetings they have, and they use AI to catalog and transcribe everything that happens during every meeting. And then the AI is actually clever enough to understand what the subject matter is and who said what and what the outcomes were. And then they give people the ability to create their own little bespoke newspapers, essentially, their own little bespoke feeds of news that are region specific, topic specific, outcome specific. And so like the notion that anyone who finds out about this isn't going to immediately be much more engaged in their community than they are right now. They're going to suddenly see, oh, look, I didn't even know that these people in my in my community are having these arguments, and now I want to participate in those arguments, or at least I want to stay aware of them. So this product is on the DSNP, and you, in order to use it, you would log in using the DSNP. Again, you may not know that they're not advertising it, but the moment you show up and the moment you sign up, you're on the DSNP. And a product like this, once it catches, you're talking about the network effect, certainly people in a time like this, when people are so motivated to participate civically, this is a product that's perfect for this moment. And I'm imagining that once people start finding out about it, they're going to be using it all the time. But it is on this network. So other projects like this are going to come along, and they are coming along, and they're going to become they're just engaging. People just find them interesting, and without their being aware of it, they are being taken to this network. And then subsequently, when they sign on to the next thing, which is also on the DSNP, lo and behold, they're already there. They don't have to fill in any forms. They don't have to define themselves. They don't have to reacquaint themselves with their friends. Their friends are there, and they're like, oh, look, I'm in this space. And that's going to become so familiar and so convenient that they're going to demand it from every place. It's not going to be long before it's going to be like having a credit card. When you walk into a place and they say, sorry, we don't take American Express, that annoys you, because whereas 50 years ago, you didn't expect anyone to take American Express, and it was a pleasant surprise when they did. But now anybody who doesn't take American Express, you're like, well, I'm not doing business here because it's a hassle. I have an American Express card, right? So I'm imagining, I'm being optimistic, but I'm imagining that within the next 5 years, that's going to be the cycle of the network effect is going to be all these newly arrived and existing platforms simply realizing that there's a lot to be gained from joining forces and integrating into one of these distributed networks. And subsequently, that is going to be the behemoth, right? The behemoth isn't going to be the next Twitter or the next, like, I wouldn't mind if Cezas became a huge success. I would love that. But I don't want Cezas to be, as people say, like the next Twitter, or they're like, oh, you're competing with Blue Sky. Blue Sky is Blue Sky, and they're going to have whatever success they have. But so long as they're going to go and try to be their own thing, I feel like there's only doom. They're not gonna, like, it's just going to be more of the same. And and I think they feel the same way, because that is why they're developing the AT protocol. And God bless them. And if that's the protocol that everyone adopts, great, we'll adopt it too. But the notion is that is the future of both social media and I think the internet in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I've been a proponent of that kind of thing for years, and it's hard to get progress on it because, everybody wants to own. Like if you're on Sand Hill Road, the whole thing is capturing and owning. That it's like it's like your defensive position to own that stuff, right? So nobody wants to give that to anybody else, but it's in our best interest as the users to do it for sure.
And it was the way the internet was intended. And we
right.
already, you will recall, I'm looking at you and I can see that you and I are roughly the same age. So you will remember a time when there was this battle between AOL and the internet, right? And essentially the internet was like Netscape. And there were the techies were like, no, just use Netscape and go on the web. What are you doing? You don't need this AOL thing. And then the AOL thing was like, no, we'll keep you safe. We've got everything nice and neat, and you won't encounter anything unpleasant. But once people understood how the magic that is the internet, AOL, God bless them, became a dinosaur that went its merry way. And I'm hoping that, like, we're at this next stage of reclaiming the freedom of the internet, and these giant. I say giant corporations. I sound like Trotsky. I don't mean it that way, but there's no reason why 5 American corporations should essentially be holding the entirety of the internet hostage. That's just not the way it was intended.
Right. Yeah. So Cezas is live. It's available to anybody now, or is it still kind of a secret network that you have to get a favor from Yevgeny to get in?
No. It is very much live. It is spelled sez.us. It's both a website and apps in both the iOS and Android stores. We just launched, it is in beta, but we just launched organizations and groups where we're encouraging people to come and build, whatever communities that they want, so that it's not just a free-for-all. They can actually organize around whatever topics, subjects, and concerns that interest them. And also professional organizations can build their presences there, and have much more control over what gets uttered within those spaces, because they actually get to have their own terms, but that are more restrictive, right? So again, the platform itself has fairly unrestricted terms, but although we have our restrictions, we're essentially for adults. We don't want adult content, and we don't want children. There are a bunch of restrictions, but in terms of speech, we do really encourage people to just be mindful and say whatever they want. But within the groups, people will be able to say, well, in my group, you're not allowed to talk about the color blue or whatever, and and then they can kick people out who insist on talking about blue. It's for everyone. We are, we're out there, and we'd love for people to come and join.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and join up and bring a handful of friends with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring everybody.
Well, Yevgeny Simkin, thanks so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
David, it's always a pleasure. I'm always available whenever you want to shoot whatever excrement is going past. My guns are loaded.
Yeah, and we should definitely connect again when as the progress with this DSNP progresses.
For sure, yeah. I'll keep you in the loop, and happy to come back and tell your listeners all about it.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you again.
Until next time.
That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. If something in this episode sparked a thought, or maybe even lit a fire, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a voice message or even schedule a quick one-on-one chat right from our contact page at outrageoverload.net/contact. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.